You're not family anymore. Not after what you did, my sister typed into the group chat. My phone buzzed nonstop. Cousins reacting with shock emojis, my uncle dropping a thumbs up, and then my mom replying, maybe it's for the best. I stared at the screen, heart racing, fingers trembling over the keyboard. What exactly did I do? I asked. No one answered. Instead, my sister removed me from the chat. Just like that. Years of birthdays, holiday plans, and family updates gone in a single click. 10 minutes later, I got an email notification from my lawyer. Subject line, final draft attached. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and I'm 36 years old. I work as a compliance officer for a mid-sized logistics company based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. It's not glamorous. It's not the kind of job that makes people lean in at dinner parties and ask for more details. Nobody's ever said, wow, compliance, tell me everything. But it's steady. It pays well. And more importantly, it trained me to do something most people find boring, but I find essential. Read documents carefully, track inconsistencies, and never assume good intentions without verification. In my family, I was always the practical one. The responsible one. The one who followed rules, showed up on time, and kept her mouth shut when things got messy. I was the daughter who balanced the checkbook at 16 because Dad asked me to help with the store's books during tax season. I was the one who drove Mom to her appointments when she didn't feel like asking anyone else. I was the one who remembered birthdays, paid attention to deadlines, and quietly handled things behind the scenes while everyone else took the credit. My sister, Danielle, was the favorite. And I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it the way you'd say the sky is blue. It's just a fact. Danielle was 2 years older, louder, more charming, more dramatic in every sense of the word. She had this way of walking into a room and making everyone orbit around her. When she got AC in school, my parents said she was creative. When I got an A, they said, well, that's just Lauren. When Danielle forgot to show up for a family dinner, it was a misunderstanding. When I showed up 10 minutes late once because of traffic, my mom didn't let me hear the end of it for a week. Danielle married Troy Whitfield when she was 28. Troy was the kind of man who wore expensive watches and talked about investments he didn't fully understand. He ran a small consulting firm that never seemed to land any notable clients, yet somehow he always drove a new car. Nobody questioned it. Nobody questioned anything about Danielle or Troy because questioning them meant questioning the family's golden narrative. I wasn't rich or glamorous. I didn't marry into money. I didn't have a big house or flashy vacations. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment, drove a Honda Accord with 120,000 miles on it, and spent my Friday nights reviewing spreadsheets or reading mystery novels with my cat, Gerald, purring on my lap. But I had something they didn't expect. I had patience. I had documentation. And I had a refusal, deep in my bones, to ignore red flags. Growing up, I learned that the safest way to survive in a family like mine was to observe. Don't react. Don't argue. Just watch. Watch who says what. Watch who changes the story. Watch who benefits when the truth gets blurred. After our dad passed away 2 years ago from a heart attack, the family hardware stores became the center of everything. Dad had built Mitchell's Hardware from a single storefront into 3 locations across the county. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a legacy. He left equal ownership to me and Danielle in his will, with clear instructions that both of us would share decision-making authority. I didn't want control. I never did. I wanted transparency. I wanted to know where the money was going, who was making decisions, and whether the business our father spent 40 years building was being treated with respect. But Danielle and Troy saw my questions as threats. My mom saw them as inconveniences. And the rest of the family saw them as proof that I was difficult, uptight, and jealous. They thought my quiet personality meant weakness. They thought my preference for documents over drama meant I didn't have the stomach for a fight. They were wrong. And when that group chat message came through, when my sister typed those words and the family lined up behind her like soldiers following a general, they thought they had cut me off for good. They thought they had won. What they didn't know is that I had already prepared for that exact moment. I had been preparing for months. If you've ever been labeled too serious, While someone else got all the praise for being fun and spontaneous, I see you. Being the responsible one in a family can feel like carrying a weight nobody acknowledges. You hold things together, and when you finally ask for help or accountability, suddenly you're the problem. If you know what that's like, hit subscribe and tell me your story in the comments below. Have you ever been pushed out of a family conversation just for asking questions that nobody wanted to answer? Click like or share if you believe fairness matters, even in families. Especially in families. The day before the group chat explosion, everything unraveled because I asked one simple question. I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, reviewing the monthly bank statements for Mitchell's Hardware. Dad had set up the accounts so that both Danielle and I had access. After he died, I made it a habit to review the statements every month. Not because I suspected anything at first, but because that's just who I am. I notice things. I track things. It's what I do for a living, and it's what I do in life. That night, I noticed a withdrawal of $14,000 from the operating account. It was labeled Strategic Investment, Phase 1. I had never heard of any strategic investment. There had been no meeting about it, no email, no discussion. $14,000 just vanished into a line item that sounded important but meant nothing. I called Danielle. She picked up on the fourth ring, and I could hear Troy talking in the background, something about a reservation at a steakhouse. "What is it, Lauren?" she said, already sounding annoyed. "I'm looking at the March statement," I said. "There's a $14,000 withdrawal labeled Strategic Investment, Phase 1. Can you explain that?" There was a pause. Then she said, "It's an investment. You wouldn't understand." I wouldn't understand? I repeated. "I review financial documents for a living, Danielle." "What kind of investment? Where did the money go? Who approved it?" "Troy and I discussed it." "It's for the business." "Discussed it with whom?" "Because you didn't discuss it with me, and I'm a co-owner." She sighed loudly, like I was a child asking why the sky was blue during a thunderstorm. "Lauren, not everything requires your approval. Sometimes decisions need to be made quickly." I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "Can you send me the documentation? The contract, the terms, whatever paperwork is associated with this investment." "I'll look into it," she said. "Good night." She hung up. The next night, I went to my mom's house for dinner. It was supposed to be casual. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, the smell of garlic bread filling the kitchen the way it always had since I was a kid. But the moment I sat down, Danielle started. "Mom, Lauren called me last night interrogating me about the business like she's some kind of federal agent." She said it with a laugh, but the kind of laugh that's designed to make you feel small. Troy chuckled from across the table, cutting his meatloaf without looking up. My mom frowned at me. "Lauren, why are you creating tension?" "I'm not creating tension," I said carefully. "I asked about a large withdrawal that I wasn't informed about." "See?" Danielle said, gesturing at me with her fork. "Why are you acting like an auditor? This is a family business, not a courtroom." "Family businesses still need accountability," I said. "Dad would have wanted that." The table went quiet. Invoking Dad was always a gamble. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it backfired. That night, it backfired. "Don't use your father's name to justify your paranoia," my mom said quietly, and the conversation was over. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Because when I got home that night, I dug deeper. I cross-referenced 3 months of statements. And I found more. 7 separate transfers over 90 days, totaling just over $41,000. All of them labeled vaguely: consulting fees, operational development, vendor assessment. Every single one of those payments went to a company called Whitfield Strategy Group. I looked it up. Whitfield Strategy Group was registered to Troy Whitfield, my sister's husband. He was paying himself from the family business using fake consulting labels, and Danielle was either helping him do it or turning a blind eye. My hands were shaking when I closed my laptop. Not from anger. From clarity. I knew exactly what was happening. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning, I sent a calm, professional message to the family group chat. "Hi everyone. I've been reviewing the business financials, and I have some questions about several transactions. I'd like to request documentation for the following line items." I listed them all. 7 transactions. Dates. Amounts. Payee names. Within minutes, the chat erupted. Danielle replied first. Are you serious right now? My cousin Derek said, Lauren, this feels really aggressive. My Aunt Patricia typed, this is so embarrassing. Why can't you just talk to Danielle privately? I had talked to her privately. She dismissed me. I'm asking reasonable questions about shared business finances, I typed back. I think transparency is fair. Then Danielle sent the message that changed everything. You're not family anymore. Not after what you did. My mom followed up, maybe it's for the best. And just like that, I was removed from the chat. Kicked out of the family conversation like I was a stranger who had wandered into the wrong room. I sat on my couch for a long time. Gerald jumped onto my lap and purred. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. It's Lauren, I said. I need to move forward. I'll have the final draft to you by tonight, he said. Here's the thing they didn't know. I hadn't just started asking questions that week. I had been quietly building a case for 4 months. I had already consulted a lawyer. I had already shared copies of every record, every statement, every suspicious transaction. The group chat wasn't my last stand. It was my final attempt to give them a chance to do the right thing. They chose not to. After the group chat incident, things escalated fast, but not in the way I expected. I thought maybe Danielle would call. Maybe my mom would text me an apology. Maybe someone in the family would reach out and say, hey, that was harsh. Let's talk. None of that happened. Instead, they closed ranks. Within 48 hours, I was removed from every email chain related to the business. I discovered this when I tried to log into the shared email account we used for vendor communications and found my password no longer worked. I called the store manager, Phil, a good man who had worked for my dad for 15 years. Phil, I can't access the business email anymore. Did something change? He hesitated. I could hear him breathing, the sound of a cash register dinging faintly in the background. Lauren, I was told you stepped back from the business, he said carefully. Who told you that? Danielle. She said you decided to take a break and that she'd be handling everything for now. I closed my eyes. Phil, I didn't step back. I was pushed out. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, quietly, I'm sorry, Lauren. I don't want to get in the middle of this. I didn't blame him. He had a job to protect. But the message was clear. They were erasing me. A week later, I tried to log into the financial software we used for bookkeeping. Access denied. New password required. I called Danielle directly. She didn't pick up. I texted her. Did you change my login credentials for QuickBooks? She replied 3 hours later. The accountant updated security protocols. It's standard. It wasn't standard. I knew it because I had helped set up those protocols with Dad 5 years ago. There were no scheduled credential rotations. She was lying, and she wasn't even trying hard. Then came the business decisions. I found out through Phil, who still talked to me occasionally in quiet, guilty phone calls, that Danielle and Troy had signed a new lease for a 4th store location. A 4th location. Without consulting me, without a vote, without any discussion. The lease was for a space in a shopping center on the east side of town, an area with 3 competing hardware chains already established. It was a bad location. Anyone with basic market sense could see that. But Troy had apparently convinced everyone it was a growth opportunity. They spent $32,000 on the deposit and initial renovations. From the business account. Money that belonged equally to me. That was the first betrayal. Exclusion. They cut me out of every decision, every system, every conversation, and then pretended I had chosen to leave. The second betrayal was public. It happened at my cousin Derek's engagement party, about 3 weeks after the group chat incident. I almost didn't go. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the banquet hall for 10 minutes, listening to the muffled sound of music thumping through the walls, smelling the exhaust from my own car mixing with the evening air. I told myself I was going for Derek, not for them. Derek and I had been close as kids. He deserved my presence at his celebration. I walked in, found a seat near the back, and tried to be invisible. It worked for about 20 minutes. Then Danielle spotted me from across the room. She was holding a glass of champagne, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She walked over to a group of relatives standing near the dessert table. I couldn't hear what she said at first, but then her voice rose, deliberate and performative. "Oh, be careful what you say around here," she announced loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Lauren might sue you." People laughed. Not everyone, but enough. My Aunt Patricia covered her mouth and giggled. Troy raised his glass in a mock toast. I felt the heat rise in my face, the taste of something bitter at the back of my throat. But I didn't flinch. I looked directly at Danielle and said, clearly and without raising my voice, "Accountability isn't a lawsuit, Danielle. It's a responsibility." The laughter stopped. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Danielle rolled her eyes and walked away, but I saw it. Just for a second, something flickered across her face. Uncertainty. She wasn't used to me standing my ground in public. I left the party early. I sat in my car again and cried. Not because of the humiliation, but because of the loneliness. The realization that these people, my blood, would rather laugh at me than listen to me. That was the second betrayal. Public mockery. Making me the villain at a celebration to deflect from what they were hiding. The third betrayal was the worst, because it came from my mother. It was a Sunday morning, about 5 weeks after everything started. My phone rang at 8 in the morning. I was making coffee, and the smell of the grounds mixed with the cool morning air drifting through my kitchen window. I saw Mom on the caller ID and picked up immediately. "Lauren," she said, and her voice was trembling. She was crying. "Mom? What's wrong? Why are you doing this to us?" she asked. "Why can't you just let it go?" "Let what go, Mom?" "The fact that Danielle and Troy are stealing from the business." "Don't use that word," she snapped through her tears. "They're not stealing. They're managing. They're the ones who showed up after your father died. They're the ones who kept the stores running." "I showed up too," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. "I was there every weekend for the first 6 months. I helped with inventory. I helped with payroll. I did the quarterly taxes." "But you left," she said. "You went back to your job and your apartment and your cat, and Danielle stayed." "I didn't leave. I have a full-time job, Mom. I can't run a hardware store during business hours. That doesn't mean I abandoned the business." She wasn't listening. She never listened when Danielle's version of events had already taken root. "They're talking about voting you out," she said quietly. "What?" "Danielle says as majority stakeholder, she can call a vote to restructure ownership." "She's not a majority stakeholder," I said firmly. "Dad's will gives us equal shares. 50-50. She can't unilaterally restructure anything." "Well, she says she's talked to a lawyer, and he told her she can." "Then her lawyer is wrong. Or she's lying about what the lawyer said." My mom sighed. "Lauren, please. Just let this go. Come to dinner next Sunday. Apologize to your sister. We can move past this." I stood in my kitchen, holding my coffee mug so tightly I thought it might crack. The sound of a bird singing outside the window felt absurd, too cheerful for the weight of that moment. "You want me to apologize," I said slowly, "for asking where $41,000 went. I want you to keep this family together." "So do I, Mom. That's exactly what I'm trying to do." She hung up. That night, I received a formal letter in the mail. Not from a real attorney, as it turned out, but printed on letterhead that looked official enough to intimidate someone who didn't know better. It stated that due to irreconcilable differences in management philosophy, a vote had been called to restructure the ownership of Mitchell's Hardware, and my participation was no longer required. They assumed I'd fold. They assumed that the pressure from Mom, the social humiliation, and the fake legal threats would be enough to make me surrender my inheritance and walk away quietly. They assumed wrong. The next morning I responded. But I didn't respond with tears or a phone call or an emotional text. I responded with a formal legal accounting request, drafted by my attorney, delivered by certified mail to Danielle, to Troy, and to every address associated with Mitchell's Hardware. The letter requested full financial disclosure for the past 24 months, including all transactions, contracts, vendor agreements, and compensation paid to any entity affiliated with the ownership group. It gave them 30 days to comply. Their arrogance was at its peak. They truly believed I had no leverage. They believed that because I was quiet, because I was careful, because I didn't make scenes or raise my voice, that I was powerless. They were about to find out how wrong they were. What Danielle and Troy and my mother and every cousin who laughed at that engagement party didn't know was that I had been building my case long before the group chat exploded. It started 4 months earlier, on a rainy Wednesday night in January. I was reviewing the year-end financial summary for the business, something I did every year as part of my responsibility as co-owner. The numbers didn't add up. Not in an obvious way. Not in a way that would jump out at someone skimming the pages. But I don't skim. I read every line. I cross-reference. I check totals against individual entries. It's what I do, and I'm very good at it. I found a discrepancy of $6,000 between the reported expenses and the actual bank withdrawals. That first night, I didn't panic. I simply saved the statement. I downloaded it to a secure folder on my personal hard drive. Then I pulled the previous month's statement and did the same thing. And the month before that. Over the next several weeks, I quietly downloaded every monthly statement going back to the month after Dad's funeral. I archived every email between Danielle, Troy, and the business accountant that I had access to. I saved text messages. I screenshotted conversations. I created a spreadsheet tracking every suspicious transaction, noting dates, amounts, payees, and descriptions. And then there was the voicemail. It came on a Thursday afternoon in February. Danielle had called me, probably by accident, and left a message. She was talking to Troy in the background. I could hear the clink of glasses and the low murmur of a restaurant. Her voice was casual, almost bored. Just move it to the consulting line. No one will notice. 6 words. Casual. Careless. Devastating. I saved that voicemail in 3 separate locations. 2 cloud services and a USB drive I kept in my desk drawer at work. In March, I hired a forensic accountant. Her name was Rita Delgado, and she worked independently, taking referrals from attorneys who specialized in business disputes. I gave her everything. Every statement, every email, every screenshot, every entry on my spreadsheet. She spent 3 weeks reviewing it all. When she called me with her findings, her voice was calm but definitive. Lauren, there's a clear pattern of misuse. The transfers to Whitfield Strategy Group have no corresponding deliverables. No invoices, no contracts, no scope of work documents. This is money being moved from the business to a personally owned entity with no legitimate business justification. She paused. In total, I'm seeing approximately $68,000 in questionable transfers over 20 months. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. $68,000. Not the $41,000 I had initially tracked. Rita had found transactions I had missed, ones buried in categories like equipment maintenance and staff training that actually traced back to Troy's company or to personal credit card payments. Armed with Rita's report, I went to my attorney. His name was David Chin, and he was sharp, methodical, and completely uninterested in family drama. He cared about evidence and legal standing, and I had both. Together, we built the document. 22 pages. Not a single sentence was emotional. Not a single line was written in anger. It was precise, clinical, undeniable. It outlined breaches of fiduciary duty under the terms of the partnership agreement our father had established. It documented financial misconduct with dates, dollar amounts, and supporting evidence. It cited the relevant state statutes governing business partnerships and co-owner rights. It included Rita's forensic analysis as an appendix. It laid out the legal consequences of noncompliance, including civil litigation and potential criminal referral for fraud. I wasn't reacting to being kicked out of a group chat. I wasn't responding to my sister's cruelty or my mother's guilt trips. I was executing a plan that had been in motion for months. They thought I was sitting at home crying. I was sitting at home building a case. There was one person in my life who made all of this possible, and I don't just mean in a legal sense. I mean in the sense that he reminded me I wasn't crazy. His name was Arthur Bennett. Mr. Bennett, as I always called him, because he was the kind of man who commanded that level of respect without ever asking for it. He was 71 years old, semi-retired, and had been my father's attorney for over 25 years. He had drafted the original partnership agreement for Mitchell's Hardware. He had helped Dad set up the ownership structure, the bank accounts, the succession plan. He knew every clause, every provision, every intention behind every word in those documents, because he had written them with my father sitting across from him at that same oak desk in his office. I called Mr. Bennett in late February, before the group chat incident, before things had fully erupted. I told him what I had found. I told him what I suspected. I told him I was scared, not of Danielle, but of being wrong. Of being the paranoid, jealous sister they all said I was. He listened without interrupting. The only sound on the line was his steady breathing and the faint tick of the grandfather clock in his office, a clock I remembered from childhood visits with Dad. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father believed in equal accountability, Lauren." That wasn't a suggestion. It was the foundation of how he built that business. If someone is violating that foundation, you don't just have the right to act. You have the obligation. Those words carried me through every hard night that followed. Mr. Bennett reviewed everything. He went through Rita's forensic report line by line. He compared the findings against the original partnership agreement and confirmed what I already suspected. Danielle and Troy had violated multiple provisions. They had made unilateral financial decisions without the required co-owner consent. They had redirected business funds to a personally owned entity without disclosure. They had attempted to alter the ownership structure without following the procedures outlined in the agreement. "This isn't a gray area," Mr. Bennett told me during one of our meetings. "This is black and white. Your father's agreement was specific about these things because he anticipated the possibility of disagreement. He just never imagined it would look like this." Meanwhile, life went on in the Mitchell family as if I didn't exist. Danielle and Troy threw a barbecue in late April. I wasn't invited, but I heard about it from Phil, who attended reluctantly. He told me that Danielle stood up during the barbecue, champagne in hand, and announced plans to expand Mitchell's Hardware into a regional chain. "We're moving forward," she told the gathered family. "No more negativity. No more distractions. This is our future." They toasted. They cheered. They ate burgers and potato salad and pretended that everything was fine. They pretended I didn't exist. Phil told me all of this quietly, almost apologetically, during a phone call that evening. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called Mr. Bennett. "They're celebrating," I said. "Good," he replied. "Confident people make careless mistakes." He told me the document was nearly finalized. David Chin had reviewed it from the litigation side, and Mr. Bennett had reviewed it from the partnership side. Everything was airtight. "I'm scheduling a formal meeting," Mr. Bennett said. "I'll send the notice to Danielle and her attorney of record. They'll be required to attend. And if they don't? Then we file immediately, and the court compels them." The notice went out on a Monday. The meeting was set for the following Thursday at 10 in the morning at Mr. Bennett's office. Danielle called me for the first time in weeks when she received the notice. "What is this?" she demanded. "A meeting," I said. "Your attorney is welcome to attend." "You're being ridiculous, Lauren. You know that, right?" Thursday, 10 a.m., Mr. Bennett's office. I hung up. They walked into that meeting confident. Danielle wore a blazer and heels, looking like she was attending a business luncheon. Troy wore a suit that was slightly too tight and a watch that was slightly too expensive. They brought a lawyer, a young guy named Voss who looked like he had passed the bar about 15 minutes ago. They thought this was going to be a conversation, a negotiation, maybe a scolding. They thought they could charm their way through it, the way Danielle had charmed her way through everything her entire life. I walked in ready. I wore a gray blouse and black slacks. I carried a leather folder with 3 copies of the document inside. I sat down across from my sister, and for the first time in months, I looked her directly in the eyes. Mr. Bennett's office smelled like old leather and wood polish. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with legal volumes that had yellowed with age. A grandfather clock stood in the corner, ticking with the kind of steady, unbothered rhythm that felt almost judgmental, as if it had seen 1,000 family disputes and found them all equally predictable. There were 6 of us in the room. Mr. Bennet sat at the head of the long conference table. I sat to his left. David Chin sat beside me. Across from us sat Danielle, Troy, and their attorney, Voss. My mom wasn't there. She hadn't been invited. This wasn't a family discussion. This was a legal proceeding. Danielle crossed her legs and leaned back in her chair. She looked around the room with a half-smile, like she was humoring a child. "So," she said, "what's all this about?" Mr. Bennet didn't smile. He didn't make small talk. He opened his folder and said, "Thank you all for attending. We're here to address documented concerns regarding the financial management of Mitchell's Hardware, as governed by the partnership agreement executed by the late Robert Mitchell." He slid 3 copies of the document across the table. One to Danielle, one to Troy, one to Voss. This is a 22-page summary of findings, supported by forensic accounting analysis and documentary evidence. I suggest you read it carefully. Danielle glanced at the first page and then looked up. "You're serious?" "I am," I said. She laughed. But it was short. Forced. The kind of laugh that evaporates the second you realize nobody else is laughing with you. Voss picked up the document and began reading. His expression changed within the first 2 pages. I watched his eyes move faster, flipping pages, his jaw tightening. Mr. Bennet began reading key sections aloud. He started with the transfers. Between March of 2 years ago and January of this year, a total of $68,412 was transferred from the operating account of Mitchell's Hardware to an entity called Whitfield Strategy Group. This entity is solely owned by Troy Whitfield, who is not a partner, employee, or authorized vendor of Mitchell's Hardware. Troy shifted in his seat. "Those were consulting fees," he said. "Legitimate business expenses." "Consulting fees require a consulting agreement," David Chin said, speaking for the first time. "There is no signed agreement between Mitchell's Hardware and Whitfield Strategy Group. No scope of work. No deliverables. No invoices matching the transferred amounts. Under the partnership agreement, any expenditure exceeding $5,000 requires written consent from both co-owners. No such consent was obtained." Mr. Bennet continued. He read through the unauthorized lease for the 4th store location. He detailed personal expenses that had been charged to the business account, including a $1,200 dinner at a steakhouse, a $3,000 weekend at a resort, and recurring payments to a country club membership, all coded as client entertainment or staff development. "These are not legitimate business expenses," Mr. Bennet said. "They are personal expenditures disguised through fraudulent categorization." Danielle's face was changing. The smugness was draining out of it like water through a crack in a dam. She was sitting up straighter now, her arms crossed, her jaw set. "This is insane," she said. "You're twisting everything." "Am I?" I said. I pulled out my phone. "Would you like to hear the voicemail you left me in February?" The room went very still. I pressed play. Danielle's voice filled the office, casual and careless, layered over the background noise of a restaurant. "Just move it to the consulting line. No one will notice." I let the silence hang. Troy leaned forward. "That's taken out of context," he said quickly. "We were talking about a legitimate reallocation of funds." "Then you'll have no trouble providing the documentation to support that," David Chin replied. "Because we've requested it, and none has been produced." Voss leaned over and whispered something to Danielle. She shook her head. He whispered again, more urgently. She stared at the table. Mr. Bennet laid out the consequences. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. "The options are as follows. Option 1. Full repayment of all misappropriated funds within 90 days, voluntary resignation from all financial management roles within the business, and implementation of oversight protections including an independent accountant and quarterly audits. Option 2. We file a civil lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and conversion of business assets. Given the evidence, we are also prepared to refer the matter to the district attorney's office for criminal review." Troy's face went white. Not red, not flushed. White. Like the blood had left his body entirely. He started to speak, but Voss put a hand on his arm and stopped him. I looked at my sister. For the first time in my life, she wasn't performing. She wasn't smiling or deflecting or making a joke. She was sitting across from me, stripped of every mask she had ever worn, and she was scared. You said I wasn't family, I said, my voice steady and clear. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't lie about where the money goes. Family doesn't mock you at parties and cut you out of group chats and send fake legal letters to intimidate you into silence. I paused. I didn't stop being your family, Danielle. You stopped acting like mine. She didn't respond. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. She just stared at the document in front of her like it was a mirror showing her something she didn't want to see. Voss asked for a recess. Mr. Bennett granted 15 minutes. They went into the hallway. I could hear the muffled sound of Troy's voice, tight and angry, and Danielle saying something I couldn't make out. When they came back, Voss spoke on their behalf. My clients are prepared to discuss resolution terms. The power had shifted. Completely. Permanently. And everyone in that room knew it. The resolution didn't happen in a single afternoon. It took 3 weeks of back and forth between attorneys, but the outcome was never really in question after that meeting. The evidence was too thorough. The violations were too clear. The voicemail alone would have been enough to make any judge lean forward in their chair. Danielle and Troy signed a repayment agreement. The full $68,412 would be returned to the business account in structured payments over 18 months. Troy's company, Whitfield Strategy Group, was permanently banned from receiving any payments from Mitchell's Hardware. The lease for the 4th store location was reviewed and ultimately terminated, with the losses absorbed as part of the overall repayment plan. Danielle stepped down from all financial management responsibilities. She retained her ownership share because the partnership agreement guaranteed it and because, despite everything, I didn't want to destroy her. I wanted to correct the course. An independent accountant was hired to manage the books. Quarterly audits were implemented. A new co-management structure was put in place, with both owners required to approve any expenditure over $2,000. Mr. Bennett personally oversaw the restructuring. It was the last major case he worked on before fully retiring. Family gatherings became quieter after that. Not hostile, but careful. People measured their words around me in a way they never had before. I don't know if it was respect or fear. Maybe both. Maybe there isn't always a clear line between the two. My mom called me about 6 weeks after the meeting. It was late, almost 10 at night. I was in bed reading when the phone rang. She didn't say hello. She just said, "Your father would have wanted fairness." I waited. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," she added. "I'm sorry too, Mom. Will you come to dinner on Sunday?" I went. It wasn't perfect. Danielle barely spoke to me. Troy didn't come. But my mom made meatloaf, and the garlic bread smelled the same as it always had, and for a few minutes, sitting in that kitchen, I felt something close to peace. I didn't destroy the family. That's what they accused me of, and it's the lie I refuse to carry. They were destroying the business, the legacy, and the trust that held us together. I stopped it. They tried to erase me. They removed me from chats and email chains and financial systems. They mocked me at parties and pressured me through my mother and sent fake legal threats to my mailbox. They thought being quiet meant being weak. They thought being careful meant being afraid. Instead, I proved that I was never powerless. I was patient. And patience, when it's paired with evidence and principle, is the most dangerous thing in any room. If your family ever tried to push you out when you asked honest questions about money, you know exactly how painful that is. It's not just about the dollars. It's about the message behind the silence. The message that says you don't matter enough to be told the truth. Being labeled dramatic or difficult for wanting transparency can make you doubt yourself. It can make you wonder if maybe you're the problem. Maybe you are too serious. Maybe you should just let it go. Don't let it go. If the numbers don't add up, they don't add up. Your instincts are not paranoia. Have you ever been excluded just for standing your ground? Have you ever been the one person in the family who asked the uncomfortable question and paid the price for it? Share your story in the comments. I'm reading every single one. Subscribe if you believe fairness matters, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. And click share to help this story reach someone else who needs to hear it tonight. Someone who is sitting in their apartment right now, staring at a bank statement, wondering if they're crazy. They're not. Your story has power. If you felt a connection to mine, if something in this resonated with a chapter of your own life, please subscribe and share your journey in the comments below. Every share you give this video helps it reach someone who might be going through the same thing right now, someone who needs to know they're not alone and they're not wrong. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for believing that the quiet ones have something to say.